So Enbridge was out on Friday talking about and disclosing the path of their mainline optimization 2 project, which will bring more Canadian barrels down to the Gulf Coast. Given that we've talked about that before and theorized and brainstormed a potential path, the exact path that would take, I thought it would be interesting to go over what the actual path appears to be. It's also timely with a lot of people talking about Canadian egress projects. A couple weeks ago, we talked about Trans Mountain filing for their DRA, or drag reducing agent, expansion. Certainly they have another expansion they can do. And I continue to hear more rumors about other projects that want to try to move Canadian barrels out of Canada into the US. And I'm sure people have heard about the West Coast option, which gets talked about all the time, that the Canadian government's trying to push forward in the future. So I think we can hop right in. We'll just switch to the main screen here. I'm just going to quickly, just to orient everybody on what Enbridge is up to. They have sanctioned their mainline optimization 1 project. So this has been sanctioned for, I think, a full quarter now, almost. And this is different. So we'll just touch on this really quick because I know we've talked about this before, but just so everybody knows what's going to be happening in the next couple of years. They have an expansion that's moving 150 down the main line. This is mainline optimization 1. 50 is being left in the Midwest markets. And then 100,000 barrel a day expansion on Flanagan South to move those barrels to the Gulf Coast. Seaway does have extra space on it, so doesn't appear they're going to have to expand Seaway to get those barrels there. Flanagan does have a lease on Seaway, so that's how those barrels are going to get down to the Gulf Coast. Let me clear this out, and we'll dive into what Mainline Optimization 2 project looks like. So I'm just going to pull up the main line. Actually, let's leave Lakehead off for now. All right, so here's the Canadian main line here. So as some had thought, and I had mentioned, I thought that there might be a new pipe that's going to be built down to the Bakken, but I did mention they do have the ability to reverse a pipe. They are actually going to reverse their Bakken pipeline. So I'm just going to color this differently just so we can distinguish and kind of see what we're looking at here. So they are going to reverse this pipeline, and I should back up here. There's 2 paths we're going to talk about with this project. We're going to talk about the path that the light oil is going to take, and we're going to talk about the path that the heavy oil is going to take. So how they've shown this project is what appears to be some sort of either there may be some extra space they can utilize here down to this point here, the Cromer point, or they're expanding this here. But they are going to move up to 250,000 barrels a day of new oil down this line to here. At this point, they are going to transition. Now, this is a pipe that does today and previously did move Bakken oil up to the main line, and then it would get on the main line and go to the Midwest or wherever it would go to. They are going to reverse this line and bring that oil into North Dakota. So again, this is one of the options that we thought was possible. I also thought a new build was possible from these points. But it appears they're going to move the light oil this way. So the light oil, instead of going down this line, which what it did previously, they're going to transition up to 250,000 barrels a day of light oil down this Bakken pipeline. Now, one of the reasons I was a little bit skeptical that this line would move that oil was it's only rated at, I think, 149,000 barrels a day of capacity. However, it is 12 to 16-inch pipeline. If it's light oil, they could theoretically push this to up to 250, I think. So pushing these barrels down to the Berthold point here. Now, as they've disclosed previously, they were going to utilize Dakota Access in some way. So here's Dakota Access. Dakota Access moves light Bakken oil today down to Patoka. You'll notice there's a little bit of a gap here. So they actually have another pipeline called the North Dakota Pipeline, which moves oil this way toward Clearbrook. This actually has dual pipes right here, and this previously moved oil to this Bakken pipeline to move oil up here. So it's actually versus its egress capacity over here, this North Dakota line, I'll just bring it up, we might as well. We'll color this one, oh, why not? Let's do dark blue. So this North Dakota line is actually two lines here. So they're going to be able to, and previously this carried oil to the east, and some of it would get off here and come up here. Some of it would go this way. They're going to be able to reverse one of these lines and push that into DAPL. So that's how they're going to get their oil from the main line. The light oil, again, this is the light oil path, from the main line, down this Bakken pipeline, over on their North Dakota line, and then into DAPL. So that's how that's very likely going to work. Now, one of the interesting things here, and I'm going to pull up Lakehead really quick. So if we're pulling 250,000 barrels a day of light oil off of this main line, remember the expansion I believe is going to be heavy oil. So you're adding up to 250,000 barrels a day of heavy oil to this line. You're pulling the light off here, which creates space here for the heavy, theoretically. But there are refineries along this route that theoretically relied on that light oil, particularly in the Chicago area, probably. So remember, you're adding heavy oil going this way. The fact that you're shuffling down the light oil down this line means it no longer gets to this Midwest Chicago refining market area. Well, Enbridge has a solution for that, and the solution that they had on their presentation was to utilize CHECAP pipeline to be able to move these light volumes. So let's go ahead and color CHECAP. Let's make it red. So again, here's the path. We're moving, transitioning the light barrels that used to flow this way. We're transitioning them to DAPL. They're flowing down DAPL, and they're going into CHECAP pipeline here, where they can still utilize and get to this Chicago area refining market and then beyond if they need to. So you're shuffling the barrels that used to come this way. You're just moving the light barrels this way. And by doing that, assuming they're expanding this piece or have room on this piece, you're freeing up space that the light oil used to take up here and replacing it with heavy oil. So the heavy oil now will be able to come this way and be able to get to Flanagan. So now that we've finished up the light oil route, really quick once again, you have light oil coming this way, they're transitioning it over here, it's coming down to Patoka, and then from Patoka it theoretically could go south on Etcop, but it likely comes in here and backfills the loss of light oil that was coming off the main line. Hopefully that makes sense. Now the heavy oil path, again, you're expanding or have space of 250,000 barrels a day of new capacity here. The light oil that you've transitioned off this line, you're putting the heavy oil that used to take up that space on that line, and you're getting your barrel down to Flanagan here. Now this is where it gets a little bit interesting for me. We'll pull up Flanagan again. So remember, Flanagan's already going to be expanded as part of Mainline Optimization 1. So here are the flows on Flanagan. We'll just go to quarterly here. You can see this has been pretty full. There's been a little space recently, but it's a 700,000 barrels a day of capacity. Mainline Optimization 1 will make that 800,000 barrels a day of capacity. We're talking about potentially 250,000 more barrels a day of capacity for the heavy oil. So the heavy oil, the 250,000 barrels a day of heavy oil comes here. The path they indicated was that taking Flanagan and then Seaway down to the Gulf, that heavy. So one of the reasons I was a little bit skeptical of Flanagan continuing to move barrels is typically 36-inch pipelines like Flanagan that Enbridge uses max out at about 800,000 barrels a day of heavy. What I may have missed was Flanagan also carries some light and medium. I don't know how much, but the fact that it carries some light and medium means they may be able to expand this beyond the 800,000 barrels a day if I was assuming just heavy barrels. So that's an interesting piece there. Another thing I'd like to point out is, we'll bring up Seaway here quick. So there is some space on Seaway. So Seaway is around 950,000 barrels a day. I'd note that Seaway is two 30-inch pipelines that runs north to south. One of them is about 650,000 barrels a day of capacity. The other one is around 300,000 barrels a day of capacity. You may ask why there's a difference between the two, such a big difference between the two. I don't know for sure, although I would theorize that it's because one of them was built relatively recently, 2014. That one of the 30-inch lines was built. It's newer. It's probably able to handle more capacity, and I think it was built specifically for heavier oil. The other one's about 50 years old. So there is space on Seaway to take some additional volumes. Remember, they're going to have to take 100,000 barrels a day of additional volumes for mainline optimization 1. Assuming there's 250 that gets contracted on mainline optimization 2, that would push this thing probably past its limits. But that old 30-inch line can probably be expanded beyond 300,000 barrels a day would be my guess. I don't know that for sure, but 30-inch pipelines can typically handle more than 300,000 barrels per day. So I think that's an interesting overview. I still have some questions that I think are interesting to think about. One is, if you're someone who is shipping light oil down the main line and getting the tariff rate on from Edmonton to Chicago for light oil was around $4.50 US per barrel. So very economical, very competitive light oil. Those barrels are being shifted over to DAPL. How does that work tariff-wise? Because the tariff rate on DAPL itself, just DAPL, doesn't count what you'd have to theoretically pay part of the main line here, part of the Bakken pipeline here, DAPL, and then a CHECAP line. You'd have to pay it's over $5 just for DAPL. So how does that work? Is DAPL going to have to lower rates? Are those barrels going to be somehow, is there going to be some sort of a joint tariff that allows DAPL to capture some of that number, not all of it? I don't really know how that's going to work, but it's something to think about, that the rates on DAPL on their contracted stuff is around $5 or over $5. So how does the discrepancy on those prices work? The other one is, and I forgot to mention this, the light oil going up CHECAP. CHECAP does have space. We don't actually, based on the disclosures in the data we look at, I'm not able to actually derive what the actual flows are on this pipeline, but this is a 26-inch pipeline, and Enbridge says it's 360,000 barrels a day, which seems reasonable. Based on me backing into rough amounts of northbound flows, I have it under 100,000 barrels a day is what it moves today, would be my guess. Again, I can't say these numbers for sure, but that makes sense, right? It's an underutilized asset. They're going to utilize this, and it looks like the numbers match. Let's say 100,000 is flowing through it today. It can move another 260. Seems to fit pretty well that they can move those barrels that way. So to sum up, I think it's a really clever project, one that I hadn't thought of, mainly because I figured that Flanagan was mostly full, which may not be the case based on the mix of oil that it moves. So we'll see how this plays out. It seems like Canada gets all the talk recently with potential flattening or potentially rolling over volumes in some tier 2 U.S. basins and flattening in the Permian. A lot of people are just wanting to talk about Canada because that's kind of the spot that people see that are going to be growing in the next few years. So hopefully this was helpful. Please reach out if you have any questions. We're giving trials out still. As you can see, the portal's a little bit different than what it used to be. There's a lot more functionality. There's a lot more cool things you can do with it. Reach out to us. We're happy to talk. We're happy to give out trials. So hopefully everybody has a great week. Thanks for listening.